Hello. Today we'll be talking about the Jesse Wells song Complain. But before we get started on that, if you're looking at your screen, you might notice there's an update. I have eyes now that aren't my own because I didn't like that you could see my actual eyes. It looked a little uncanny valley to me. So now I have beautiful green eyes with little white highlights, and and I can still see. So that's nice. It's a lot harder to see, I'll give you that. It's a lot darker, and like I have my computer right beside me for quotes and all this sort of thing. This one, I feel like I won't have to look at my computer a lot, but generally speaking, I have it right beside me here, and it is a lot harder to read. I can see my general surroundings fine, but it is a lot harder to read. So, for future reference, if I like kind of stare at the screen for a minute like that, or stutter something, it's because I'm struggling to see it over the mesh. But I think it looks a lot better. So, beauty is discomfort. Anyways, I'll get started with the actual video that you clicked on. And the first point I'd like to say about the song Complain is the very clear references to kind of the generational problems that we have in society right now, which is that the adults right now, Gen Zers, etc., all have this problem with baby boomers and Gen Xers. Most people just blame baby boomers, but I see a lot of the same sort of qualities in Gen Xers a lot of the time. And, a lot of their grievances come from the fact that those were their parents, and their parents kind of fed them this society that no longer exists. And a lot of baby boomers continue to believe that society exists as well. Because kind of you were told this idea that if you work hard, you will succeed. And while that wasn't 100% true with the baby boomers either, to the same extent that people think it is, it was a lot easier to succeed when in the baby boomers' times of being adults. If you worked a factory job with one income in the household, you'd be able to afford your home, the basic necessities, and still have something extra. Whereas nowadays, the vast majority of people have to rent, and bills are paid, yeah, and all your necessities are paid for, but you don't typically have a lot left. And, this is different for everybody. Some people have more left over than others, obviously, but still the vast majority of people have far less left over than they used to. Plus, we don't own our own homes, which is a huge symbol of, the status of a society. If no one owns their home, it is usually not a very good sign for the health of the economy of that area. And a lot of the bad feelings that come with especially the housing market, but also just cost of living in general, is directed at baby boomers. And while some of that I feel is warranted, because it's a lot of the specific baby boomers' actions. Obviously, not the whole of baby boomers. Not every single baby boomer ruined the economy, but it is still that generation that led to what is happening right now. And then a lot of it comes down to the fact of mentality as well. Because even if that specific baby boomer did nothing to cause your life to be what it is now, well, a lot of them have very little sympathy and very little. They kind of live in a bubble of what society is like nowadays. Like I said earlier, they still think that the idea of the society they lived in when they were younger, they think it's still possible. I'm sure a lot of you have either been told or have heard the old adage of like, you walk into that business and you hand in a resume and you will get hired because they love initiative. Stuff like that. That is just unrealistic for nowadays. That is not going to work. And they don't understand that. A lot of it is well-intentioned or simply ignorant is a lot of people's problems, especially the more negative things. Because I do think that, like my example I gave right there, is well-intentioned. They just simply don't know that that's not how life works anymore. But a lot of baby boomers will morph that into, if it's this easy, why aren't you doing it? You must be lazy. And I think that's where a lot of the animosity comes from the current, adult generations and all that, is because a lot of baby boomers are just simply not very nice about having these ignorances and all that sort of thing. Like, obviously, it's never good to be ignorant about something, but we are all ignorant about something. And so I do understand why they think this is how society still works, but a lot of them also refuse to listen to their children and their grandchildren about what society is like nowadays, and they continue to live in their idea of what society is like for new homeowners and all that sort of thing. But kind of going into my next point, they're very connected, is that the other generations tend to relinquish a lot of responsibility for current issues because they blame baby boomers as well. Like, I see especially a lot of like millennials and all this sort of thing. Like, I feel like my generation, Gen Z, as you can tell, I'm young, and I feel like Gen Z is very passionate about issues and is very passionate about actually like trying to do something. Whether we could argue until we're blue in the face about whether petitions and protests and etc. work, but I feel like my generation is very passionate about those things and is trying to help the world in any way possible. But on the other end, that might not be a generational thing, and it might simply be just because we are young. Young people are always the drivers of change. They're not necessarily the leaders, but they are the vast majority of the people that show up to the protests, or the vast majority of people that make the signs, and all that sort of thing. Like, obviously not every single person, but they typically are always the one that are the crowd in these movements. In the 70s, it was the people in their 20s, and previous millennials and all that sort of thing. They had their protest movements as well. They're less famous, but just as big, just as like the numbers were still huge. I remember my father attended a major protest in Canada, where I live here, and it was so long ago. When he was telling me this story, he didn't even remember what the protest was about. But thousands and thousands of people showed up, and they all got tear gassed by the cops, and there's like rampant police brutality at that protest. But my point being is that young people are always the one that show up to these things. So it's too early to say whether Gen Z is actually a particularly passionate generation about social issues, or we're just young. It could be either one. Maybe a bit of both. Hard to say. Probably somewhere in the middle. I'm assuming it's somewhere in the middle. But having said that, baby boomers were the hippies of the 70s. They were all of the Vietnam protesters or draft dodgers. So it's like, I don't know. It's hard. I feel like you can't really say if an entire generation is actually a good protest generation. I don't know how to word that, but you understand what I'm trying to say, I'm sure. But anyway, that was kind of a tangent to go with the fact that a lot of people still kind of throw away their role in societal issues because they blame something. And with this song specifically, it's blaming the generation before them. And so they just would rather kind of mope and wallow in the consequences of these things happening around them and say, oh, well, it's it's the baby boomers' fault. It's my parents' fault. So I'm going to do actually nothing to fix my situation, and I'm just going to blame them. And, sometimes it is stuff that we, at the end of the day, individually have very little control over, like the housing market. I can't snap my fingers and make houses cheaper. But it's also not productive to sit there and be like, fucking baby boomers for raising the cost of houses. Like, that's not helpful. That's not helpful. It breeds hatred, which, it's not good for your soul. It's not. And it's just, at the end of the day, it's not productive. Nothing good has happened because of hatred. Everything good has happened because of love, and everything good has happened because of passion for helping others or innovation and all that sort of idea. Hatred drives none of that. And but yeah, so I think it's important to kind of see your own place in the world, and if you see areas where you can help in social issues that you're passionate about, do that for sure. And try not to sit there and blame a lot of groups of people. I think that the only group of people that it is reasonable to blame is the ultra wealthy, the elites, the as Jesse Wells says, the parasitic class. That is the only group of people that it is reasonable to blame. And even then, you can sit there and acknowledge they're the reason for everything, but at the end of the day, it's not helpful to, again, wallow in that. It helps no one. Helps absolutely no one. And even though the average person's role in societal issues is far smaller than these people's, you still have that small impact. And so if you I'm trying to think of an example of a social issue that you could contribute to. Like, okay, climate change seems so vast, and obviously billionaires and big companies make the vast majority of like carbon emissions and pollution. That doesn't mean that you taking steps to be more eco-friendly is completely useless. It does mean it is a far smaller difference, but it is still that little step that is better to take than just to sit there and be angry, is kind of my point. And again, I also feel like it's important not to shame other people for not doing this stuff, because there's lots of people that simply can't, because a lot of focusing on social issues means that all your bare necessities are taken care of. That is, in my opinion, why everything in our society is meant to drive the cost of living up, is because if we're all focused on feeding ourselves and paying rent, then we don't care about what's happening to other people. We only care what's happening to us. Social issues are a secondary after your own needs, which is just how humans work, and it only makes sense. You have to take care of yourself before you're able to take care of others. And it's a big issue in society, is that a lot of people can't, or feel like they can't. So it is important not to like bash people for not contributing to social issues or doing not enough in your opinion. At the end of the day, love everyone. I know it's kind of corny, but it's how you're peaceful in life, in my opinion. But anyways, that kind of went on a bit of a tangent. Point is, don't blame the baby boomers. It's not productive, but I do understand why you do. That's kind of my point. And I think a lot of this comes down to as well his point at the end there of, quote, "A phone's a 2-month wage made by child slaves. Is it worth it just to watch Joe Rogan?" Which obviously can be like, it's very upfront about what it's about and all that sort of thing, and people's role in desensitizing themselves to society, which again makes them not actually go through the steps to change society, because they'd rather sit there and complain about it. And then in the song, he also just talks about a couple issues that plague our society. Yay, especially younger people, but everyone as well. So it talks about higher education, post-secondary education, whatever you want to call it, college, university. That's what I'm talking about. In that, a lot of it is kind of dooming young people from the start, because mattering on the field you take and all that sort of thing does very much so matter on your degree, but the vast majority of people that have like bachelor's degrees and stuff like that do not get jobs in the fields that those diplomas and all that kind of lead towards. A lot of people end up getting jobs that require 0 degree to obtain, just because the job market is slim. And the other portion is that a lot of people with diplomas and all that sort of thing, you value your labor because you went through all these student loans and years of your life to get this diploma. You want to be paid more. And sadly, lots of jobs just simply don't pay you that much more, or still pay you minimum wage, or tell you to be an unpaid intern, which is just a form of modern day slavery. And so while post-secondary education is valuable, it does have a huge place in society, obviously, and I think should be far, far more accessible. The way it is built right now, along with the job market, it is a detriment to a lot of people's lives. And then again, I've discussed it at length, but he mentions the cost of housing and how it's ridiculous, and refers to digging a hole as your option. Yay. And then, kind of mentions gig culture as well. Mattering on where you live, it might not be as large. Like, I know in larger cities, and like everyone talks about LA, the gig economy and all that, but it's still a thing in most cities. We've got food delivery services, we've got other delivery services, and we've got house cleaners, and etc., etc. That's all gig work that is largely underpaid, is largely overworked, and unpaid overtime is really common, and tipping culture too, which is just a whole thing, a whole discussion that people get into. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of tipping culture. I think just fucking pay your employees, but at the end of the day, I also know that companies don't want to do that. So in industries where there is tipping cultures, people are paid a lot more than what they would be if it was just the company paying them. So it's a tricky one, in my opinion. But yeah, I think that pretty well sums it up. Had fun talking about this one today. And I'm very happy with my eyes. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good day. Bye-bye.